Hey crafters, thanks for joining me. In this video, I'll be making a fun springtime card with Lavinia Stamps. I'll use a jelly plate, stencil, and lots of inks. Hope you enjoy. So the jelly plate that I'm using is A5, so it's about 8 by 6 inches. And I'm using my brayer to add one of the Lavinia Stamps inks. This is Paprika, onto the jelly plate. I was lucky enough to get some of these inks for Christmas, so I've been enjoying trying them out. Now once I've got the ink on there, I'm going to add some Brushos and water onto the surface. So I've got some yellow here, and I'm sort of concentrating on the center area. A little bit of crimson and some violet. And the trick with these, I think, is you need to add a color that contrasts with your background. And you'll see the yellow looks really beautiful and it stands out a lot. Now once I've removed the jelly plate, I'm just going to dry this with my heat tool just to make sure that it's nice and dry before adding some more ink. And I'm going to trim it down to my card size, which is 5 by 7. So I'm going to start adding some distress inks to this, and I'm using a finger dauber just so that I can be very precise about where the ink goes. And I was going for a springtime theme with this card, so I wanted bright colors. So the first one I used was the new Kitsch Flamingo, and this one is Carved Pumpkin, which looks great against the yellow Brushos and the pink from the Kitsch Flamingo. And then I'll add in some Twisted Citron. And I'm just adding these in random areas just so that there is some contrast on my background. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to use my stencil. This is the Lavinia stencil. It's called Leaf Trails. And I'm using some Candied Apple Distress ink. And I'm sort of concentrating the ink in the corner, the lower right-hand corner of my background. And then I'm going to switch it over and do the same thing. So I have a nice symmetrical impression from this beautiful stencil. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to use the same Candied Apple Distress ink and apply it around the outside of my background. And I just used the finger dauber for this, but you could always use a ink blending brush or whatever applicator you prefer to use for ink. Now usually my go-to colors are more blues and purples, and you'll see an example of a card created with those colors at the end of the video. But like I said, I wanted these colors to reflect spring, so that's why I went with the reds, pinks, and yellows. And I just added a bit more of that Kitsch Flamingo on the inside of the Candied Apple. It's such a beautiful bright pink, and it just screams springtime to me. And I'll just keep adding ink until I'm happy with the background. Now usually when I stamp on with my Lavinia stamps, I use an acrylic block. But this Tree of Wisdom stamp is a little bit too large, so I'm using my stamp platform for this. And I'm stamping this with the Memento Tuxedo Black ink because it's alcohol ink friendly, and I'm going to use my Copic markers afterwards. And I'm just stamping this twice because I didn't quite get a full coverage with my ink there. Now, if you're using your Lavinia stamps in a stamp platform, you just need to be a bit careful because of the shape of the stamps. You can sometimes get the ink around the stamp onto your background. So I've just added the Tree of Wisdom on both sides of my background here. And then I'm going to add in my fairy. So this fairy is called Zamira, and I used 2 inks for her because I wanted her hair to be a different color from her body. So I used the VersaFine for her body and now this Altenew ink on her hair. And because I took quite a while before I stamped her, her body didn't stamp perfectly, but I will show you how I fixed this seamlessly in a few moments. Now this fairy is just gorgeous and it's a perfect addition to my card. And then I added in the bee miniature stamp. And this is actually the stamp that inspired this whole card because I wanted to build a springtime scene for this little bee. Then I colored in the trees with my Copic markers and I just used E37. Now because I did the background of this card with mostly distress inks, the Copic markers work really well on the background. Whereas if I had done the background with my distress oxides, the alcohol in the Copics wouldn't work very well with the oxide and you'd get a weird effect. So this is one of the advantages of using distress inks. So I colored in the body of Zamira with this polychromo pencil, and this is oil-based, which is similar to the VersaFine Clair ink. And I noticed that if I use this oil-based pencil on the oil-based ink, I get a really nice finish on Zamira. In the past, I've used my Copics or other markers to color in images, and it doesn't blend as well as using a polychromo pencil. And I also used another polychromo to add some highlights to the hair and make it a little bit darker. Now I use my Copics on the bee miniature stamp, but this is of course such a tiny stamp that you wouldn't necessarily have to color this image in. So I really like how this card looks so far, but I thought it looked more like an autumn card rather than a springtime card. So adding some mini dots really transforms these trees into springtime trees. And I just used 2 different colors of VersaFine to add these little dot details, which look like colored leaves or flowers on the trees. This just goes to show you that even a tiny stamp can have a major effect on your card. And I love how Lavinia Stamps has a whole range of stamps, and these little tiny ones are so affordable. And I find it quite easy to collect them. So I'm just adding in some more mini dots using another color of VersaFine Clair. And because I used the purple and the green, they show up quite well on the red. But you can always change the color for the colors that you want on your card. Just gorgeous. So now I'm going to use some ink around the outside. And I started using one of my green distress inks, but I didn't like the look of it. So I switched over to the VersaFine Clair, and this is the same green oasis color that I used on the leaves, and I found this worked really well on the outside of the card. I wanted to leave in my mistake though, because I think it's important that when you're crafting, you shouldn't give up if something doesn't work. You should keep going and just try something different. So I added the green around the bottom edge, and then once I added that in, I went again with my Candied Apple Distress Ink and blended that into the card. And I think this helped add more of a springtime feel to the card because of the undertones of green. Now, once I was happy with that, I added a sentiment from Lavinia Stamps. And there's a whole bunch of great ones to choose from. But I wanted to add the springtime one. It's called Words of Spring. and it's a beautiful springtime poem. And I used the same paprika ink from before, and I stamped it on the top and the bottom of the card. Now, I did mention that this card is 5 by 7, so I put this onto a 5 by 7 inch card blank. And I didn't add an inside sentiment of this card because I wanted the outside of the card to do all the talking. I think this is a great all-occasion card. So the last thing I did is I just wanted to add a little bit of sparkle, shine, and texture to the front. So I used glitter dots in Yellow Bird, and I just added some details to Zamira as well as to the two trees on either side of the card. Now, as I mentioned, I usually use more of a blue and purple palette. So I created this card again with a different color scheme just so that you could see the difference that colors make. And this is using the Blue Lagoon, also from Lavinia Stamps, as well as some different Distress Ink colors. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this video inspiring. Be sure to subscribe so that you're notified whenever I post a new video. Have a crafty day!